What's up, everybody? It is Izzy, and in today's installment of the top 10 exercises for hypertrophy, we're going to discuss the best exercise for legs. Now, I'm not that dumb. I know that hamstrings and calves are technically part of your legs, but this video is going to focus on the quads and adductors because those are the two muscle groups that make up the majority of your leg, and frankly, because calves and hamstrings and the rest of your backside is going to be covered in other videos. So, in my opinion, there's really only two exercises that we can consider as the best leg exercises, and that is going to be some kind of a squat variation and some kind of a leg press variation. Now, the reason why I'm going to go ahead and pick a squat over a leg press is because the squat does not start you in a position where your hips are already flexed. So on a leg press, because of the back of the seat, you're going to start in a partially flexed position and your hips never get fully extended in any type of leg press. Additionally, when most people leg press, they are not going to be able to get the same degree of knee flexion that they do in a squat, either because of their technique, mobility, or because they just have access to a shitty leg press. Most leg presses are not that good, and it's actually relatively rare to find a full range of motion leg press that doesn't need a bunch of modifications, like putting pads or a foam roller behind your back in order to get it to go deep enough. That is not the case with a squat variation. Anyone, even with minimal equipment, can find a squat variation that allows them to get deep, get maximal knee flexion, and also train hip extension at the same time. Now, my favorite variations for the legs are always going to be something that has a back pad. And the two squat variations that have a back pad are the hack squat and the pendulum squat. And the reason why I prefer a squat variation with the back pad is because it physically stops you from cheating. When the vast majority of people try to squat for quads and adductors, what happens is that their hips shoot backwards once the quads get maxed out, and glutes and adductors start to take over, and the quads get less and less stimulus, and the individual ends up more and more bent over. Now, of course, there are ways to combat this in a free squat. You can use heel elevation and make sure that you cue hips forward, and that will go a long way if you are a home gym lifter or you just don't have access to a hack squat or a pendulum squat. That said, the issue there compared to a back pad is that when you have a back pad, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to cue anything. And because you're on a fixed track, there is less stability demands. And less stability demands means that the primary muscles can work harder. In fact, I would go as far as to say that a hack squat or a pendulum squat is the best assistance exercise for a powerlifting squat to make your quads stronger and to help fix the good morning squat. But that's neither here nor there. Again, the reason for that is because your hips cannot shoot back in a squat variation with the back pad, which means that your knees have to stay forward and the load has to stay in the quads, and you don't have to think about technique. You just set up with the correct foot position and you squat your hardest and you reap all the quad gains. So now I'm sure what most of you are going to want me to weigh in on is what's better, a pendulum or a hack squat? And they both have pluses and minuses, and let me get into that now. In general, a hack squat is going to have an even strength curve, meaning that there is no pivot point on a hack squat. It moves straight up and down along rails, just like a leg press. That means the resistance isn't really any different at any given point in the movement, which means that it then comes down to the natural strength curve of the movement itself, which is lengthened biased. So almost all hack squats will be lengthened biased. The problem is that makes it very, very hard on many people's knees, especially if they don't have access to a really good hack squat. And this causes people to do all sorts of things like reverse band the hack squat or have to use knee wraps. And again, that takes away from the advantage of it being lengthened biased in the first place. A pendulum squat, because it does operate off of a pivot, actually has an ascending strength curve, which means that it gets harder towards the top. This better matches the profile of the movement, and it makes the pendulum squat a little bit easier to progress because you're not limited by what you can get out of the lengthened position, nor is it as hard on most people's knees. However, the issue with that is that the emerging research seems to show that we want things to be the hardest in the lengthened position, and we want things to be limited by the lengthened position if we are going to get the most hypertrophy on a set per set basis. The other very small knock against the pendulum squat is like a leg press, it starts you in a position where your hips are already a little bit flexed and they never get fully extended in a pendulum squat, and they do in a hack squat. So if I had to render a verdict and pick the absolute best exercise for legs, it would be the squat, of course. Whichever squat that you have access to is going to be your best bet. But if you do have access to a commercial gym or a good gym, look for a pendulum or a hack squat. And if you have access to both, if you have a good hack squat that doesn't hurt your knees, don't reverse band it and just do it as is, because in my opinion, the back pad, which forces you to stay in your quads, makes it the best quad exercise there is. It's absolutely zero thinking. Just get as deep as you can and squat as hard as you can and reap the reward of much, much bigger quads.